Let's step back in time to the early 1800s. In 1819, there were 22 states in the Union. James Monroe was serving as our 5th president. The population of Maryland had just crossed the 400,000 mark. The city of Frederick had been incorporated 3 years before, and the remote village of Wolfsville consisted of a few families who found this place to be close to the heart of nature. The Hoovers were the first permanent settlers at Wolfsville. John Hoover and his wife Susanna first lived in a small log cabin. They were parents to 10 children, 8 born in the cabin, and the last 2 in the stone farmhouse. The Hoover house and barn are still standing at the corner of Wolfsville and Harp Hill roads. In those early days, God was working among the people, using circuit riders to preach His Word and teach the Christian way of life. It was a well-known circuit rider and traveling evangelist named Christian Newcomer who came to Wolfsville. He found a warm welcome at the Hoover homestead, and in the year 1819, the Salem congregation was born. The name Salem comes from Scripture. In the book of Genesis, the city that would eventually become the site for Jerusalem is identified as simply Salem, which means peace in Hebrew. Salem Church has a very interesting history, especially in those earliest days. Most worship services were conducted in the large stone Hoover house. The big meetings were held in the Hoover barn, located across the road. Early records tell us that members of the church were from Presbyterian, German Reformed, Lutheran, and Mennonite backgrounds, and it's interesting to note that most early sermons were spoken in German, not English. The congregation eventually outgrew the Hoover house after 28 years of hosting meetings. Land was donated by the Hoovers in 1847 to build a church. It started out as a simple rectangular structure with thick stone walls and a steeple. It's the same building used today as Salem Sanctuary. The inside of the building looks somewhat different than it does today. The choir loft was not a raised area. The church was heated by 2 wood-burning stoves at the front, 1 on each side. In the winter, the congregation sat in the front to stay warm by the stoves. The church was lighted by oil lamps that hung from the ceiling, as there was no electricity until 1938. We don't know a lot about daily life in the church during the late 1800s. What we do know comes from a few newspaper articles and church records that have survived. We know that people came to church by foot or horse. We know the church had hitching posts and watering troughs along the south side of the building and the other side of the road. We know the church held revival meetings. One of them lasted 3 weeks. There was standing room only crowds, 16 conversions, and 12 new Salem members. We know the church organized its first Sunday school in 1888 and made arrangements for the use of an organ for the first time the following year. Salem's Board of Trustees is responsible for church maintenance, and they were as busy then as they are now. Early records tell us that in the summer of 1871, the church building needed repairs. It was going to cost around $900. The church didn't have quite enough money in hand, so it had to borrow $25 from a local resident and paid it back with interest. And then one Sunday, a bolt that held the church bell in place broke, so the bell could not be rung for the evening service. The following year, lightning struck a tree in the churchyard and the church steeple. It splintered the cupola post and shattered several window panes. In the late 1800s, the whole church was rebuilt. There's a small plaque on the outside front of the church which reads, "Rebuilt 1893." This was a major undertaking costing $1,600. Many members donated their labor. They took off the roof, took out the seats and windows, rebuilt the walls, and repainted the steeple and outside woodwork. All the money was raised through the personal efforts of the pastor. In the early 1900s, carpet was installed over the pulpit and altar area, extending to the front seats and down the aisle. The church was wired for electricity. A coal-burning furnace was installed, and a choir loft was added. One of the central features of Salem Sanctuary, even today, is the large painting of Jesus praying in the Garden of Gethsemane. The scene was painted by pastor and artist Reverend Dr. C. Guy Stambach. In 1948, Salem's Women's Sunday School class bought the painting for $105 with birthday money they had collected from class members. Reverend Stambach was pastor at Bethel Church in Wolfsville in the 1920s. He painted similar pictures which can be seen in at least 6 other churches in the area. The painting was carefully restored in 1998. The outward appearance of the church facility has also changed over the years. A vestibule was built in 1954, and the 2-story educational building was added in 1967, which provided Salem with classrooms, a kitchen, and assembly area. And yes, even restrooms for the first time. Prior to that, parishioners used outside facilities behind the sanctuary. During Salem's 190 years, the church has been affiliated with 3 denominations. From its beginning in 1819 until 1946, Salem was known as the Salem United Brethren in Christ Church. This was the first denomination to be organized and established in America. Then in 1946, 2 denominations merged, and Salem became known as Salem Evangelical United Brethren Church. In 1968, denominations merged again, changing our name to its current Salem United Methodist Church. Salem has welcomed 75 pastors since the church was built in 1847. For many years, Salem's pastors did not preach here every Sunday, as they were shared with other churches in the area. Salem's dedicated Sunday school teachers provided important leadership to the congregation by continuing to teach on Sundays without a pastor visit. Salem was grouped with other area churches in circuits and charges. In the 1800s, the Old Frederick Circuit included areas as wide as Myersville, Wolfsville, Thurmont, and Walkersville. Then, in the early 1900s, the Wolfsville Charge was formed with Salem and Garfield churches, and initially a 3rd church, Pleasant Valley in Washington County, and for a few years, Pleasant Walk. Just 1 year ago, Salem achieved its long-held goal of becoming a single-station church.